Good morning, folks. Very pleasant good morning. If you all can please stand and join me in a Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Pleasant good morning. Please be seated. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here to the 4 Points by Sheraton here in Meriden, Connecticut, USA. This is our Chamber's 120th year in business, and we're glad you came out to join us. This event this morning is also sponsored by our friends from the Cheshire Chamber of Commerce and Hubcap Wallingford, so we're very pleased they could be with us as well. We have two brand sponsors this morning. I'd like to recognize our friends from TD Bank. Thank you so much. And right down the hall here, the Silver City Sports Bar and Grill. Let's give them a hand too. And this program is affectionately called the Breakfast Club Celebrates because we are celebrating a number of things. In the month of May, we have Employee Health and Fitness Month. We're celebrating Skin Cancer Awareness Month and National Hamburger Month. National Bike to Work Week. This is also a National Salsa Month. That's the food and not the dance. And this is also a National Older Americans Month. And since we are all here, we are getting older, so we should give us a hand for doing that. There you go. Very, very nice.
Teacher Awareness Week, too.
Teacher Awareness?
Teacher Appreciation Week.
There you go. Good to know. Teacher Appreciation Month. Let's give them a hand. Very nicely done. I'll write that down for next year. Teacher. Cool. We're going to introduce some of our board members who are here. These are the folks who set policy for our chamber. We have the chairman of our board of directors from A&A Office System, Mr. Richard Pendred. We have from Luke's Consulting Engineers, Ron Degan. A new to our board from Liberty Bank, Dan Quesnell. Good to see you, sir. From Pro Shred Security, Mr. David Simons. Pleasant good morning. From TD Bank, Amisha Taylor. Good to see you this morning. From American Eagle Federal Credit Union, Zaida Molina. Good morning. And from Updike, Kelly Spellacy, PC, Attorney Thomas Welsh. A couple of new members in the audience today. We have from People's United Insurance Agency, Mr. Lewis Gold. Pleasant good morning. And Justin Martella, Merrill Lynch. Pleasant good morning to you. And a few folks on the city side of things. We have the Majority Leader, Area 3, Councilor Brian Daniels. Pleasant good morning. Next to Councilor Daniels is an at-large council member, Mr. David Lowell from Hunter's Ambulance Service. We have the Economic Development Assistant, Ms. Paula Mantilla. Good to see you. And passed the budget, unanimous, nicely done. Our city manager, Mr. Kenzier. Good to see you, sir. And you council guys, you're like getting this unanimous thing down really well. You know, this is fabulous. We like to see both sides of the aisles working together. Very nicely done. Quickly down the event list, we have Wallingford Restaurant Hops happening this Wednesday. Come out for that. We have on Thursday morning, bright and early, a business before hours at Boscov's. We have Girls Inc. is having their annual Strong, Smart, and Bold event on May 11th. We have a business after hours on May 19th with our friends of the Quinnipiac Chamber of Commerce. Wednesday, the 25th, we have a sales workshop in the morning with Sandler Training Sales Services, and lots of stuff going on. Check out www.midstatechamber.com for all the events and activities. We hope to see you soon. There is one event, however, that needs lots of attention. because it's for those who like to chase that little white ball. To tell you a little bit more about that is our chairman, Mr. Richard Pendred.
Yeah, so it's that time of the year where you just keep talk about golf. Don't pay attention to the weather out there, because on June 8th, on the day of our tournament, I have a good news. It's going to be sunny. It's going to be about 80 degrees, nice cool breeze. Put that in your books. We'll make it happen. But June 8th is our golf tournament this year. It's going to be at Hunter's Golf Course. As you know, the proceeds from this go to the Sanford Shore Education Awards. So it's a big event for us here as a chamber member. We're asking that you participate and help us out. Our presenting sponsor this year is ProShred Securities. Thank you for stepping up and doing that for us. Thank you. And, we got Memorial Day coming up in a couple weeks, and we have a program in this tournament where you can say thank you to a veteran. And no greater way than to give them a round of golf. So that's a sponsorship that's available in this tournament. So if that's something that you would like to do, see Mr. Simons over here. He's on our golf committee. He'd be glad to help you out and show you how you can participate in that. Pin flags, tee signs, golfers, we're looking for them all. So if you're a golfer or a wannabe golfer, come on, join us. This is a scramble, so you don't have to be a great golfer. You can go hiking in the woods looking for your ball all day and still have fun. So we'll see you on the 8th. Look forward to it, and thank you for your participation.
And as Mr. Parmentier would say, it never rains on the golf course, so please be ready for that. And also this Friday, there is an event with our friends at the Women and Family Center, which is the annual Women in Leadership program. So always seats available. Hey, there you go. So talk to Robin and Pat if you can when you get a chance. So it's my pleasure now to bring back to the podium our immediate past chairperson, formerly from Brown and Welsh, and now with Updike, Kelly, and Spellacy, Attorney Thomas Welsh, to introduce our speaker, please.
Well, good morning, everyone, on this slightly soggy morning. It's always a great pleasure, both as your immediate past chair and also as a former bar leader of the Connecticut Bar Association and the American Bar Association, to celebrate and present to you a rare thing, a meaningful life done well. And that is our Senator Richard Blumenthal. Senator Blumenthal graduated from Harvard College and Yale Law School, where he was editor-in-chief of the Yale Law Journal. He had a number of distinguished clerkships thereafter, and ultimately was appointed as the United States Attorney for Connecticut. A large diet of criminal work, but in other areas as well. He also served and was elected to the House of Representatives here in Connecticut, as well as the Senate, and then was elected as Attorney General of the state of Connecticut, for serving an unprecedented 5 terms as Attorney General. And I will tell you that was an amazing thing to see, because he fought for people against large and powerful special interests. You all know about his work, and I can't do it all because we want to leave a little time for the good senator, but his national fight against big tobacco and the settlements that resulted, leading the coalition of 50 states that culminated in historic agreements with networking sites to better protect children from internet predators. He advocated for reforms in the healthcare industry, and his vigorous investigation and legal action against insurance industry abuses successfully forced financial restitution and reform, compelled greater disclosure by insurers and brokers to consumers, and recovered millions of dollars for the state, municipalities, and individuals. He successfully fought unfair utility rate charges, air pollution causing acid rain, general environmental wrongdoing, as well as a wide variety of consumer scams and frauds. He personally argued a number of cases, several major cases in court, including his successful effort to uphold the Connecticut Sex Offender Registry in the Supreme Court. He fought and sued the federal government, so he's not always on the side of government, for failing to follow or enforce environmental laws and energy statutes, as well as imposing multi-million-dollar unfunded mandates upon local taxpayers under the No Child Left Behind Act. As I said, his resume goes on and on, but amid all of that, the most amazing thing is that he has a lovely wife, Cynthia, and 4 children. How he did it in that, doing all of that, I have no idea. But it is my very great honor and privilege to introduce to you the senior senator from the state of Connecticut, Richard Blumenthal.
I really appreciate that very generous, wonderful introduction, Tom. I'm not going to talk about how I had the 4 children. Just in deference to Cynthia, you know. But I have been very, very blessed to have a wonderful family, very supportive, and you all know that that is really key to anything that we do in life. And so I thank you for mentioning them above all. And I want to thank the Chamber for being so active and so engaged in the community, particularly in supporting small business. We're in Small Business Week, and I've been touring small businesses around the state. Yesterday I was in Norwalk, talking to small businesses there, a diner and a supermarket, small supermarket, and here in Meriden yesterday actually at Protein Sciences. Very impressive. And I want to thank you also for supporting our veterans. I'm on a number of committees, the Judiciary Committee, the Armed Services Committee, the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, and I'm the ranking member of the Veterans Affairs Committee. I spend more time, more energy, and gratefully so, on veterans issues than any other. And everything that you can do, whether it's sponsoring a veteran at a golf tournament or simply recognizing them in a gathering, is really well worth it because we owe them so much. As a matter of fact, I'd like all the veterans here today, please raise your hand so that we can recognize and thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you. I'm sometimes asked why I have a blue star on my lapel. The blue star is because I have a son who is deployed at the moment. He's in the Navy, and he does stuff there that forbids him to tell me where he is, so I don't know where he is at this particular moment. I had another son who was in Afghanistan in the Marine Corps. He was deployed to Afghanistan. I knew exactly where he was, and I don't know which is worse, to know or not to know. But I am grateful for anyone who serves, and lest you think that Washington does nothing that's bipartisan, Veterans Affairs is bipartisan, and it should be. There should be nothing partisan about what we do to help our veterans. And just Thursday, after a year of work or more, I introduced with the chairman of the Veterans Affairs Committee, he and I together sponsored what we have come to call the Isaacson-Blumenthal Bill, more formally Veterans First Act, that will provide for more accountability so that the wrongdoing and misdeeds that were so prevalent, the scandal in Phoenix, you followed it in the healthcare system, where unfortunately VA employees failed to do their job and neglected to provide the service that veterans need and deserve. That kind of wrongdoing or negligence ought to be held accountable. And that's what this bill now would do, enable firing and hiring people with greater flexibility and discipline and deterrence of wrongdoing. And in addition, expanding health care for veterans, particularly caregiving at home. For the first time, we're going to support the caregivers. $3 billion for support for those caregivers at home, and also expanded educational benefits for the 9/11, post 9/11 veterans, and doing it all within the present budget by eliminating some of the waste without reducing in any way the post 9/11 benefits. So this took a lot of bipartisan cooperation. Believe me, a lot of negotiation, sometimes intense, between myself and Senator Isaacson He's a Republican from Georgia. I'm a Democrat from Connecticut. But we produced a bill that I think will pass. Why do I think it will pass? Because every single Republican on the committee supports it, and every single Democrat, I believe, will support it. And that's the kind of work that I think is really required today in Washington. I try every day, literally, to reach across the aisle, to overcome the gridlock that you see, I see. The most frustrating part of my job is the partisan paralysis that all too often overtakes and overcomes Washington, D.C. Good example, very regrettable, controversy about the vacancy now in the Supreme Court. My view is that vacancy ought to be filled. At the very least, we ought to give the president's nominee a hearing and a vote. Unfortunately, the Republican leadership has blocked that effort. I think a number of my Republican colleagues would like to go ahead and have a hearing and a vote because the vast majority of the American people think we ought to do our job. But the Republican leadership, for any number of reasons, has decided they are simply going to say no to the president. Unprecedented in our history for a vacancy to go unfilled as long as this one will. Because if there's no vote and no confirmation before the end of the year, very likely the vacancy will continue through next year, through next spring, which means 2 full years with an 8-member court. Now you can say, okay, well, what difference does that make? A lot of difference. Already there have been 2 tie decisions. That means that in the case of one of them, the obligations of someone to pay back a bank, a spouse to cover the debt of her husband, the law remains uncertain. If you're a banker, you want to know what the law is. You can deal with the law whichever way it is, but the uncertainty and the unpredictability of rules is what stymies good decision-making by businesses. And so there really is an economic cost here, as well as a human cost, in a court that increasingly is going to have 4-4 ties. It may happen on the immigration case. It may happen on the case involving government corruption. The former governor of Virginia is appealing his conviction on bribery and extortion charges. The highest court in the land ought to have a full membership, and it ought to be above politics. Now, as Tom mentioned, I've argued before the Supreme Court. I've argued 4 cases, one of them involving our sex offender registry case, very important decision. I argued 3 other cases. I was a law clerk to Justice Blackmun on the Supreme Court. I have respect, even reverence for this court. A lot of the American people give it credence at a time when most of our governmental institutions, let's face it, lack that credibility and trust. My greatest regret about this process is that the United States Supreme Court is being dragged down into the muck of partisan politics. The United States Supreme Court ought to be above it, ought to be above the partisan gridlock that we see infecting the Congress and sometimes our state legislatures. We ought to cure the causes of that gridlock, but certainly we should avoid dragging the United States Supreme Court into it. And so I'm hopeful that we will move forward. I can't predict that we will. I'm hopeful, but I'm not optimistic. Unpredictability is one of the great impediments to job creation and economic progress. And if I had to pick one priority for Washington today, it's jobs and economic progress. That has been my mission since going to Washington, to put it first, to make it happen, particularly here in Connecticut. And I think job creation and economic progress requires investment. All of you in business know to build a business, you've got to invest. Same thing is true with a country. And we've been failing to invest in our roads and bridges and rail. You know how important rail is to Connecticut. I'm very hopeful that the New Haven-Springfield line will be built by 2018. It's 2 years behind what it should be, that it will be built for $574 million, even though it's higher than the 300+ million that originally it was intended. It's over budget and behind, but we need it. And we need to upgrade and improve the rail that exists right now, Amtrak, Metro North, to make it more reliable and safe. This has been a crusade for me as a member of the Commerce Committee, which has jurisdiction over surface transportation. And so the investment in rail is so important. It's a job creator, as well as essential as a lifeblood to move people and products in our society. You can't have a 21st century economy without a 21st century transportation system. And other countries are doing better than we are. China invests about 10% of its GDP in infrastructure. Europe, about 5%. We do less than 2%. And don't forget about our roads, which I use a lot. I use rail, by the way, as well. I fly a lot to Washington and back, but I also use the rail. On a day like today, if I were going to Washington, I'd go by rail, because it's actually, in the long run, sometimes quicker to go by rail, and you can work. And if it arrives on time, it is not a bad way to travel. But the key is arriving on time. And I'll just give you one example. We have bridges in the state of Connecticut that were built at the turn of the century. Not this century, the last century. The Walk Bridge in Norwalk gets stuck, and it paralyzes rail traffic up and down the East Coast. I know. I've been there. But our roads need work as well. The bridges in this state were given a D grade by the American Society of Civil Engineers. Our roads got a C grade. The investment has to be there as well. And as important as the physical capital is, our educational capital, our human capital is important as well. College affordability, $1.2 trillion in student debt today. That's the biggest amount of debt in any category except home mortgages. It's the biggest category of consumer debt, $1.2 trillion owed by people who have graduated from schools, and it's an overhang that impedes the whole economy. You folks know, I don't have to tell you. Somebody with $120,000 in debt getting out of school isn't going to buy a home, isn't going to furnish a home, isn't going to start a business and borrow from a bank, because the risk is too great. And I don't want to take a show of hands here, but I doubt most banks would be willing to give an extended line of credit to someone who owes that much money. So the choices are constrained. And it's hard to start a family, too. I believe that we can increase the amount of Pell Grants, which is a program that exists right now, provide more scholarships so there's less debt, enable people who have that debt now to refinance it. Some of them have interest rates of 7, 8, 10%. I don't know what you're loaning money at these days, but I guarantee it's not 7, 8%. But student debt can't be refinanced, unlike mortgages and car loans. So they are stuck with that debt, and a huge number are in fact behind, many in default. People's futures are stunted, they are crippled financially, and their choices are constrained, which is bad for all of us. So I think people ought to be able to work off their debt through public service. You ought to get credit for doing public service. Firefighters, police, folks who work at the YMCA, it doesn't have to be in government. Doesn't have to be in the Peace Corps, but that's good too. And Teach for America, school teaching. All of these forms of service ought to be, in effect, recognized and rewarded. And I think there are other ways also to reduce the amount of debt. Invest. And here's the last point that I think is so important about investing in our human capital. Right now, the federal government actually makes a lot of money from student debt, $60 billion over just 5 years. Well, think of it for a moment. Should the federal government be making money from students educating themselves, improving their prospects to give back, gaining skills that are needed in today's economy? Shouldn't we be investing? I think so. And as I go around the state of Connecticut, I hear that from business people everywhere. They have jobs. They can't find people with the right skills to fill those jobs. Welders, engineers are needed by Electric Boat, where we're producing 2 submarines. I've worked very hard to get those contracts for 2 submarines because I believe it's important to our national security, just as the Joint Strike Fighter is. The engines produced at Pratt & Whitney. Helicopters are important, produced at Sikorsky. But as they increase their employment, they need people with the right skills. And the same is true of the companies that make the parts and components, which are thousands of jobs in Connecticut, hundreds of companies. They are our defense industrial base. We need to support the community colleges, the vocational and technical schools that train those kinds of skilled workers and provide access to good jobs. I think that we have an enormously bright future here in Connecticut because our biggest resource is smart people with a good work ethic. We don't have the Grand Canyon. We don't have gold mines or oil wells. What we have, our biggest resource, is folks like yourselves who are willing to work hard, who are well educated, and who are willing to give others the kind of mentoring and role modeling that is so important. And so your leadership is just tremendously important to our economy, through organizations like this one, through all the others where you are such active participants. You show leadership in ways that I think are important to young people and reaffirm faith in a system that is sometimes under attack, under criticism, cynicism. And I think that if we continue to create jobs and drive the economy forward, even if it isn't at 5% growth rate, even if it's less than we would like, as long as we're moving in the right direction, we will succeed as an economy and a state. We need to bring down the cost of doing business at the state level. I'm doing everything I can at the federal level, and I hope that some of you will visit me in Washington. I need friendly faces. But I'm really pleased and honored and delighted to be with you today, and I thank you very, very much for having me. Thank you. I'll take some questions. Yes.
Yes. Senator, 2 questions, both relating to the military, because I know it is near and dear to your heart. The first question is, last week the Army named the first female who will be an infantry officer. To no one's surprise, it was one of the young women who graduated Ranger School last year. For those people who don't know, her battle buddy was actually a young lady from Orange, Connecticut, so there's a Connecticut tie to those 2 young women. Your thoughts on that, as well as you know, Senator, the Army has been without a secretary for an unprecedented amount of time as well, and your thoughts on whether or not that position is going to be filled before
Right.
November.
Both good questions. On women in the military, I've been an advocate that women should have combat roles, that they should be deployed whatever role they're capable of doing, equal access to those services, just as men do, whether it's in combat or special operations. And I'll tell you what really converted me on this issue. A conversation that I had with Admiral McCraven, who, as you know, was a Navy SEAL and actually headed the SEALs and then all special operations. And I had dinner with him one evening, and he was talking to me about the role of women in special operations. Not just that they could do almost everything a man could do physically, but how important they were in the night raids that his men were doing in Afghanistan. These are raids similar to the one that resulted in the death of Osama bin Laden. And by the way, Admiral McCraven was the commanding officer for that raid. And he was saying to me, you know, when women are part of our team, they can talk to women. Because a woman in Afghanistan is not only reluctant, she is fearful and she is resistant to talk to a man whom she doesn't know. She's taught not to do so. And what's more, a man in combat uniform, in body armor, carrying high-powered weaponry, not going to cooperate as much as with a woman who can, by the way, be trained to speak the language, a resource in any modern combat situation that the military itself says they need to have. And by the way, Admiral McCraven told me about the Osama bin Laden raid in some detail, and at some point I said to him, you know, what was your most fearful moment? And he told me when the helicopter, you may recall, one of the helicopters went down and they had to leave it. But he said, that was not the most dangerous mission we did that evening. So what our special operators do in these situations are absolutely heroic and extraordinary. And my feeling is that women, not all women, just like not all men, can perform these roles. I hope that we will have a Secretary of the Army. That this position has been open for a while. Mr. Fanning has been nominated, and I hope will be confirmed. But frankly, like the Supreme Court nomination, a lot of nominations have been held in limbo. A lot of them blocked from votes on the floor of the Senate. And I'm hopeful that a number of them will go forward. Other questions?
Senator, welcome to Maryland again.
Thank you.
Great seeing you walking the parade as usual on the Daffodil Festival.
On a much nicer day. But I love that parade, the Daffodil Parade. And by the way, I was here for the St. Patrick's Day Parade. And I apologize, I should have apologized at the outset that I missed the 120th gala celebration. I apologize. Merredin's very close to my heart. So thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
My son went through the medical careers program at Maloney High School, went on and got a nursing degree from URI. The medical careers program at Maloney just went to competitions, scored extremely well across the board. Just last week, my son now works as a registered nurse at Yale New Haven Hospital. And just last week, he said, Dad, I'd really like to explore going to the VA hospital and working there. So I said, well, that should be an area where people should be expanding, given the push for veteran benefits. Next time I see one of my U.S. senators, I'll ask them what it looks like in the state of Maryland for expanding positions. And so here we are, we're only a few days later. So I'm asking you, what does that look like for expanding, kids coming out of college that have the nursing degrees or medical degrees and want to go into the VA hospital? What does that look like expanding in the state of Maryland?
Great question. And I'm I'm going to try to give a succinct answer, but it's a big question. And thank you to your son. I'd love to have a chance to talk to him sometime. One of the great needs in the VA system is for nurses and registered nurses, nurse practitioners, physician assistants. And what the VA is trying to do and what we're supporting them is to provide more aid for education. In other words, enable them, as I was describing earlier, to work off loans that they may have as a result of their education and provide incentives, support for tuition, subsidized tuition. And this extends not only to nurses, but to primary care physicians. You know, there's a shortage in the United States of primary care physicians. When you have trouble making an appointment, getting one as quickly as you would like, it may be because there's a shortage of primary care physicians, and it's true of the VA. There's a shortage of psychiatrists in the VA. One of the great needs in today's veterans population, young men and women coming back from combat, suffering from post-traumatic stress. Post-traumatic stress disorder, it's called. I call it post-traumatic stress. 30 to 50% of young men and women coming out of the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts suffer from it. One result is that we lose 22 veterans every day to suicide. Let me repeat that. 22 veterans every day take their own lives. That is a failure of the United States of America. And I worked on a measure, it's called the Clay Hunt Veteran Suicide Prevention Bill. Named after Clay Hunt, a Marine who served 2 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, came back, suffered from anxiety, depression, anger, couldn't sleep at night, had nightmares. And the VA failed him. It failed to give him the kind of counseling and medication that he needed. It prescribed, I think, painkillers, opioid painkillers, which not only did no good, but actually aggravated his problem. And he took his own life. Senator McCain, John McCain of Arizona, and I sponsored this measure. Again, bipartisan. He's a Republican from Arizona, as you know. And we named it after Clay Hunt. And on the day the president signed the bill, which passed by a bipartisan majority in both the House and the Senate, we went to the White House. And he and I, McCain and I, stood next to the president as he signed the bill. And next to us was Clay Hunt's mom. And I looked out at the audience in the East Room of the White House, and there were families of men and women who have taken their own lives, families of veterans who have committed suicide, including Joanna Eldridge, whose husband, Justin Eldridge, also a Marine, came back from Afghanistan and took his life and left her and 5 children. Justin was a friend of mine. And so this measure will provide more support and training for the caregivers, nurses, but also doctors, more support for families, more research into the illness, post-traumatic stress, which we still don't understand. And by the way, when we understand it as it affects our veterans, we're also going to have more understanding about how it affects people who are in car crashes or accidents at work, because post-traumatic stress is not limited to the military. And it's now recognized as an illness that affects a lot of people, and it's gone unrecognized. In the military, it used to be called battle fatigue, shell shock, you know, suck it up, get on with it. But we need to figure out how to treat it. And when we do for our veterans, we're also going to make advances on treating others. So this is a broad issue, training medical personnel so they can do better in areas where right now we have a shortage of good people. So when folks say to you, you know, there are no jobs, what are our young people going to do? Nurses, doctors, engineers, welders. You know, this is why I'm hopeful about America. Because we're going to have more automation, we're going to have shifts. Not everyone is going to work in the same job for a whole career, but folks like your son who take advantage of opportunities and who serve, your son's service is really to be admired, will help America grow. So I know I've exhausted you, and you haven't even gone to work yet. Well, let me just thank everyone for being here. I know you're very busy, and I really want to express my gratitude for this opportunity to come. Thanks to your leadership. Thanks to Roseanne for and Sean, thank you to Richard and Tom and all of you for having me today. And have a great day. And I'm told that it's going to stop raining. I'm sure the sun will come first to Meriden. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Just a couple of quick wrap-up notes. We'd like to thank our sponsors, TD Bank and the Silver Street Sports Bar and Grill. Thank you so much. You may have noticed you left your business cards in the way in, and the winner of the Castle Craig Player Wizard of Oz tickets is in fact Mr. Mark Nemeth of Jonah Labs. Congratulations. Also, I'd like to mention that Jonah Labs will be recognized at a luncheon today up in Hartford from our friend of the Small Business Development Center. Congratulations, Jonah Labs. And again, thank you, Senator, for your remarks. And folks, please have a fabulous day at work. Hope to see you all soon. Thanks for coming.